kind of bring everybody up to speed, because I recognize a lot of faces, but I think there's a lot of folks who haven't been involved in any of our meetings. So we do have some sign-in sheets going around. If you could, please sign your name, and if you'd like to receive meeting minutes or anything like that, please put your email address on there. You're not going to be able to see this, so I'm going to go through it. Essentially, our agenda for tonight is to go through the goals for success. Those are kind of the driving force behind this whole process, what it is the county really wants to achieve with the process. Then we're going to talk about the space needs, how we went about the space needs and where they're currently at. And then we're going to go through the concepts that were developed during the design workshop, talk about some budgeting numbers that have initially been put together. We're going to talk about the schedule going forward and what we've done to date, and then we're going to allow everybody to vote on which of those options they think they prefer. We've got two separate sets of ballots. One is for the formal advisory committee, and one is just for members of the public. So you can say, boy, if I like A, C, or F, or none of the above. Now you can tell us which one you prefer. So that's what's written on this agenda. That's hard to see because I'm so close to the screen and this image is so small. Let's see. These are the goals. They're also on this board up here. So this is kind of our roadmap, or kind of our guide as we went through this process. To provide a county facility that creates a safe and secure operation. That was the number one goal that we were told that we need to focus on. Provide adequate space for functional operation. Right now, we see a lot of issues where there isn't adequate space in the existing building. Well, before when the building was actually being used. Provide an attractive facility that represents the culture of the county. The building needs to be visible and identifiable as a county courthouse and promote civic pride. The facility needs to be flexible, adaptable for future change or expansions. Need to develop a sustainable facility for ongoing use in terms of the environment, the culture, and the cost of operation. So sustainability is about financial sustainability as well. Choose and develop a site that embraces the environment and the culture. And provide a 100-year building. A building that's going to last for at least 100 years. Goal number 6, locate the facility to provide access for all and best serve all residents of Mitchell County. Develop a facility that will promote and leverage economic development. Provide a county courthouse that encourages citizens to participate in their government. And develop a facility solution that is fundable and justifiable to the taxpayers. That one is key. It's got to be fundable and justifiable. If we can't afford it, we're wasting our time. What I was just explaining to the County Board of Supervisors is that, to the Planning Committee actually, is that this is a process of going back and forth. What we're going to show you tonight is designs that resulted from the initial identification of space needs. And then we said, well, if that's really what you wanted, this is what it's going to cost. The next step is we're going to be meeting with the Planning Committee, going over the program of spaces that we'll show you here in a second, and meeting with the department heads to work through some of these numbers. So these are 3 columns, which you probably can't read very well, and I can't make them any bigger because I really can't get any further from the screen. But there's 3 spaces here are. This is the kind of the courts facilities, and then these are the county departments, and down here are, boy, we wish it'd be nice if we could build some facilities to put this stuff in the county courthouse too. And these columns are the existing square footages, a previous study that was done, square footages by another architect, and then the square footages that we've come up from our interviews with the department heads and working with the courts. You are a courts expert and a district courts administrator. So as an example, the first thing you see on this chart is that the courts piece is broken into 2 parts. The first part is courtrooms, the chambers, jury, law library, And the second piece is the clerk of court. Existing square footage of the courtrooms and chambers is, and these are net square footages. Net square footages means you measure from the inside face of the wall, the inside face of the wall, just to the rooms. You're not counting corridors, you're not counting wall thicknesses. When you measure the outside of a building, the exterior face to exterior face, that's a gross square footage. So net to gross multipliers are always included in these programs because you're building gross, you're not building net square footage. So existing square footage of the courts is 6,339 square feet in the existing. And through our evaluation, we've identified a need of 7,090 square feet. So it's a little bit bigger than the existing. Honestly, it's more about rearranging the courts, reallocating some of the space. We're actually increasing the size of the courtroom side and decreasing the size of the clerk of court area to achieve that. The next thing we look at is assessor, auditor, ISIT, deputy auditor, planning and zoning, recorder, treasurer, supervisor spaces, veterans office, and then common areas, and then economic development area. And down the line, this was a previous report that was done. You can see that there's some gaps, there's some spaces that weren't accounted for, some square footages that are the same. You can see our numbers. The existing net square footage is 6,779 square feet, and the requested square footage that we received is 18,222. So that's about a 7,000 to 18,000 comparison. So the gross square footage difference, the existing is about 13,000, and everything that we've seen requested, this is gross, outside wall, is about 33,000. So that's an increase of about 20,000 square feet. As I said, we developed these numbers to give us an apples-to-apples comparison so we can evaluate different concepts. And we have, at the meeting we just had with the planning committee, we've identified the next step is going to be meeting with department heads, going through the plan, and going through each of these spaces in a detail. We've got a lot of detail to back this up, like what each individual space is within each department. So we'll be going through that.
Kevin?
Yes?
I was just seeing some of those spaces, for instance, if I read it right, like the deputy auditor was 1,100 square feet. Just to kind of put that in perspective, an average ranch-style house with 3 bedrooms, and I'm talking about a 50s, 60s ranch-style house, about 1,400 square foot. Am I right?
Yeah.
And I see that the deputy auditor's office, the square foot on that was 1,100 and something.
That's correct.
So, I mean, if you're looking at putting that in perspective, that's almost as big as, a home that some of you are living in.
My house.
So some of the spaces that are included in these numbers are storage spaces, like storage for voting machines, for example, are listed under some of these categories. So the departments, we've got a lot of detail breakdown for each department.
Now, Don,
So
the
it's not-
auditor's department had a large vault. So that's storage.
So each one of these, it's the entire department and it's everything associated with it. It's not just an office for one person in response to that.
I was just trying to put it in perspective.
So from that program of spaces, we met with the advisory committee and we asked them to identify every option they could come up with. And what are the options that you would like us to even think about for the courthouse? And we came up with 5 options for the courthouse: A, B, C, D, and F. And
Maybe you might mention to the people here who the planning committee is. I mean, some people might not know.
we've got a planning committee of 5 people. 3 of the 5 are the county supervisors. 1 is the county attorney, and the other is the recently retired judge. That's the planning committee, that's the decision-making group. We have an advisory committee, which many of you are on. that I believe is 43 people, 42 or 43 people from across the county. Now, we had the advisory group at a meeting. We asked them to tell us every option they could come up with. They came up with 5, and then we identified criteria for decision making on which of the 5 would be the ones that we wanted to study further, asked us to study further. So the criteria then was weighted by importance, by voting, which ones the advisory committee thought were most important. And so those criteria carry more weight in a decision about which option we should go forward with. Well, the 2 options that came to the top, one was the top vote-getting option was basically the rehabilitation of the existing courthouse with expansion to support the other spaces as needed. So that's the most kind of historic preservation, correct, and treat the building as best we can without kind of covering it up. And we've got historic preservation architect on our team as well, Ed Storm from Sioux City, who's not here tonight, but has been involved in the process. So that was the top vote getter. The second vote getter was, let's try to put the courts facility and as much of the rest of it as we can directly adjacent to the jail. And if need be, then connect that to the existing courthouse. And then we offered to also study a new building so that you could evaluate, well, what's the cost of new versus existing. So those were the 3 that we identified. Option A was the rehab the building and expand it. And option C was a new building, and option F was let's try and build it next to the jail and rehab the courthouse. This is number 5 because it's changed quite a bit. This was the option that came out of the 2-day design workshop. It was open to the public. Many of you were there. The jail is on the right. Okay, jail's on the right. Existing courthouse is the cross-shaped piece. As we talked with the folks at the State Historic Preservation Office, and as our historic preservation experts looked at the building, we determined the most appropriate thing would be to remove the 1970s additions from the courthouse. So in this case, we removed those additions. So what you have left is that crucifix form, the cross-shaped piece, and an addition to the south of that. And the idea was that that link that connects the 2 could have glass walls to separate the new from the existing. So it'd be very obvious what was the historic piece from 1898, I believe.
Excuse me, did you mention that you were also removing the south wing?
Yeah.
Yeah, we talked about that.
Yeah, well, you just mentioned the 70s wing, and the south wing was put in
Yes.
1926.
Everything on the south was what the recommendation was. So we developed this concept. What you'll note was following that, we got feedback from the civil engineering team member on our team that we need to comply with the parking requirements, and we also need to comply with the setbacks. We can get a variance to avoid those, but have a comparison. We wanted to comply with that. So in order to provide that parking, this parking is already here next to the jail. The existing parking lot is here. We needed 70 spaces based on the square footage of the building. And so this parking, and this parking was added in this concept so as to be able to retain this. We were also able to retain the location of the memorial. This dashed line across here represents the setback. There's a setback requirement. And as we developed this, we thought, boy, we need to develop another concept too. So this was one of the 3. That's the renovation. This is a larger view of that site. These are the floor plans that were developed further from what we had to show last time. Our last presentation of the 2-day workshop, we got a lot of input. And we went back and we revised these based on input for functional layout and other things. So what you see again, here's the existing building with the additions removed. This is that glass link. And then this is the space behind to the south. The purple line is circulation corridor. but you can see the different departments: deputy auditor, auditor, assessor, treasurer, recorder, and so on.
How many square feet is that addition?
They're all the same square footage, basically. They're all very similar in square footage.
And that is?
I have that later in the presentation. I can show you that. A lot of numbers to keep on the top of my head. I don't have that.
Kevin, could you say what, it's hard to see,
It's
what
probably about
offices are in
10,000
the old part?
It's dimensioned down there.
It's about 10,000.
The offices in
I
the
can't
old
see
part are economic development, planning and zoning. This is that lunchroom area. And
Veterans Affairs?
Veterans Affairs office right here.
And are the vaults still the vaults or what?
No,
So what are they then?
those,
Those are gonna be offices.
yeah, offices, training room, office space, training room, office, conference room. So obviously when you're working a building of this size, you can see how big it is and the scale of the other components. It's difficult to fit the smaller spaces within it, but we definitely wanted to keep the main central corridor through, and we wanted to provide an elevator that was actually handicap accessible. Same thing with the stair, code compliant. So that's what fits in that building. This is the second floor. The addition is basically all courts. These are all the court spaces. Ray, you want to talk about these a little bit? They're similar in every concept. We tried to create the most efficient courts layout we could.
And really what we needed to do is separate the circulation for public, judges, and prisoners. And the yellow is the public, the blue is the judges, and the orange is where the inmate or the defendants would come. And so everybody enters the courtroom from a different point, and they don't cross. That's the most important thing that we wanted to do for safety reasons, and that's what the existing courthouse does not have. That's one of the biggest flaws. Other than that, you get two judges, you get a shared spot here for the reporters, a jury. Jury would come out, come back into the jury suite, and then the clerk's office. Once you go through the process here and you have to pay a ticket, you just exit right into the clerk's office. And that was one thing they requested.
Some law libraries in there.
Yeah.
And public restrooms. These are public restrooms.
How many elevators did you end up with there?
There's one for judges, that's shared for judges and prisoners,
And then there's a public
and
library,
there's a public.
public elevator.
And is there a, how do they get from the jail to there? Is there a connecting tunnel?
Go back to the,
Okay.
in this game, they're basically walking across.
I see.
Or you could do a tunnel. But
Because of the way
a tunnel
this-
is just gonna be cost prohibitive.
Because of the way this concept falls on the site,
This is not a good solution.
it doesn't really work to provide a connector because you got a parking lot there.
Sure.
And it's over in the Sallyport area. So as we looked at this one, we said we need to develop a concept that fits the site a little bit better. So we went and called this 6A, because it's A, and it's the sixth iteration of this. And as you can see, it doesn't have that separator by a glass connector, but we did provide a similar type structure here and here. And these are kind of open glass pieces, again, to separate this box from the rest of that.
If people were, I don't know who was at the last workshop, but this was the other scheme that was kind of voted down. But it was the other scheme that kept the courthouse and put the addition on the back. So basically, we explored both of them.
So by pulling it up, we were able to put parking back on the street where the current parking lot is at. Gives us an opportunity to do a connection with the tunnel. So we thought we should price that out and just see what the cost of that is. This is the plan. It's more compact. But the arrangement of the spaces inside are very similar. The restrooms are more kind of sitting there in an island. And it's really driven by what's upstairs. So in order to make the courts fit, what we did was we basically took the judge and court reporter, took that block and put it here on the side,
And so this
and make
is,
it fit on the side.
this is a little less efficient because you've got more circulation. And also the clerk's doesn't, there's no light getting back to the clerk's office.
Okay, 10C, this is the iteration of a new building. It's number 10 because we went through 10 iterations of it. During the last meeting, we developed a one-story versus a two-story. And the advisory committee and the public, we got a lot of input from different folks, and it was probably about 90% of the folks said, if we're doing a new courthouse, it should be two-story, not one-story. If we do a one-story one, the feeling was it's gonna look like the jail, or it's gonna look like the building, the county building across the street. So we focused on how do we create a two-story, a new building, generally on the same site, try to retain the existing parking lot to save some of that cost. But still, even doing that, some parking on each of the two sides is required. We're able to retain the memorial site still. So there's a larger view of the site that does have a small connector from the jail over to the courthouse building.
Would that be above ground, Kevin?
Yes, that would be above ground. The service corner of the building is here. That's kind of the service area. And it's the concept, the idea of our team member who developed this, and we kind of worked together on it, was to provide entrances from three sides. Not the jail side, but the other three sides of the block.
So what's the white, Kevin, with the arrow pointing there on the outside of the building? Is that kind of a
These are kind of like porches.
portico or something?
Yeah, porticos,
Okay.
and these arrows are entry points. The main entrance is really here, but there's an entrance off the other sides, pedestrian, and parking is all around the building, so it made more sense.
So that would come from the west, is that what you're saying, the
Yeah.
main entrance?
Yeah. So this floor plan is laid out, basically, the yellow again is the corridor, circulation, lobby. The main entrance is here, but these are also entrances. There's stairs on these two corners. Again, that's yellow, that's public circulation, as Ray was expressing. The red is the defendant or prisoner circulation, and again, the blue is the judge circulation. So there's an elevator that takes them up to the court's level. So supervisors are here. There's a shared use boardroom that everybody can use for different kinds of meetings. The auditor is here, assessor, recorder, deputy auditor, and a treasurer. So all those spaces are there. There is a, I don't know if we got an image of it, but the intent would be that there would be a partial basement under this for mechanical spaces. But trying to keep the costs down, there's not, in our concepts we developed, we didn't put a full basement under this.
So is there a private office then for each elected office holder?
There is for almost all, I believe. This is a basement shown under half. Again, that was the optional stuff we showed in the program. Wouldn't it be great if we could bring some of that storage over here? And some of these storage numbers are included in the numbers above too. Auditor, voting machine storage, there's a voting training room down here. The ISIT is down there. And then this is the second floor. Again, it's pretty much all courts, but there are a few other things up there. This is pretty much that same court's layout. You have the magistrate court, the district court, library, jury rooms, judges, and court reporters, and there's the clerk. And then this is really the Veterans Affairs space, and economic development, and planning and zoning are up here. Elevator and restrooms, of course, the stairs.
Two-story space.
Yeah, an open lobby space, maybe, there too, so.
And where would the two elevators be there then?
The one elevator's here, which is kind of at this entrance, and then the other
Oh, I see.
elevator is there. So, did some quick images of what that would look like. You know what the existing courthouse looks like, and the addition would be similar, but that's what it might look like. It could have a lot of the same character. You could even use the same cupola on it if you wanted to.
Excuse me a minute, but that was from the west side?
That's from the
And
west.
that's the jail sticking out over there,
Yep,
right?
and that's the
Okay,
jail sally
okay.
port that's sticking
Yeah,
out.
okay.
And then this is option F, and that concept here was how can we put a space next to the jail? And it's really driven by the size of the courts area. The courts are so big that it pretty much fills the space between the jail and the courthouse. So the idea of just putting one on the jail and then letting the courthouse stand alone does not really work very well. It's good that we went through that exercise. But you can see that there's some need there for space. The first floor, and these are sketches right from the charrette, the design workshop. But basically, there's the existing building. A lot of the same stuff is put in there. This floor has kind of a corridor across the front and an entrance. This is an extension of the existing courthouse, basically. There's 2 elevators. To get you to the question. There's one there and one there. And all of the departments are basically along this corridor. Restrooms are here.
So where would the entrance be, on the south then, and that one?
It'll be south and the north. So
Okay.
there'll be 2 entrances, north and south.
And that eradicates the need for a convict entrance.
That's over
Yeah,
there.
because it's just directly connected, and we kind of ran it through the sally port in this case. In case you had a prisoner coming from another jail facility, for example, they could bring him into the sally port and then escort him right into the building. So there's a lot of efficiency in this layout. It might not treat the historic building the way we'd like to treat it, but it connects the 2 buildings very much so.
What is
It's a
the,
2-story piece. Yes, sir?
excuse me, the space between the jail and the addition to the courthouse? There's a
This little
strange
sliver,
looking, yeah,
that little sliver is there as a light well. Not a roof over it, but it's a light well because there are cells along that wall.
in feet, what are we talking?
It's about the same width as the corridor, so it's 5 feet, something like that. It's not very wide, just wide enough so that there's some light there.
2 separate buildings, 5 feet apart or whatever.
You can say that, yeah. As opposed to
Lopsided.
2 separate buildings connected.
Yeah,
Yeah. The second floor, again, you can see how the courts fit. And basically, the courts run from there to there, and we even took this wing to fill in a couple of spaces required for active records for the clerk. I can see it better on my screen here.
So where's the clerk of court on that, Kevin?
The clerk is right here.
Oh, okay.
That's the clerk staff right there. So it's the same as the other layouts. We worked through that, and Ray came up with a very efficient layout, so we worked with that one. Because the courtrooms are just so big, and the circulation of the different groups around it, this is about as compact as we could get it.
The drawback of this over the other one is that there's no natural light coming back to the clerks or the jury.
One of the other challenges to this was because this was so compact downstairs, we had to take one of the departments and put it upstairs. So we put the assessor's office upstairs. And ideally, it'd be nice to have them all down, but as we talked to the departments, they felt that if one was going to be upstairs, probably the assessor would be the one to go upstairs.
What else is upstairs I couldn't see?
Well, it's the clerk, economic development, county boardroom, workroom and offices, and then it's just the courts.
You said the county boardroom. To me, when you say county boardroom, I always think of board of supervisors, but they
County
aren't up there, are they?
supervisors are up here in this concept.
They are up there.
They've expressed to us different ideas of where each one of them would like to be in the building.
Of course we have.
We'd have some ideas too.
Part of the challenge is how we make them fit within the footprint of the existing building. What can we put in there? And so,
Well, they used to be upstairs.
and a new stairwell in this one too. You can see we put a stairwell at the front corner of the existing building. In the earlier concept, there was a stairwell and an elevator, and we didn't put an elevator in this one. We put it out in the new because
So I'm curious, Kevin, do the state fire marshal and everything, they require more than one enclosed stairway or only one enclosed stairway? Because a lot of times you wouldn't be able to use the elevators, would you?
It
if there
depends
was a fire?
on, yeah, if there's a fire, you can't use the
Yeah,
elevators.
so is one stairway then sufficient?
On a
or-
two-story building, the code requires that more than half your stairs are enclosed one way or another. And they can be enclosed in different ways. They can be enclosed with fire curtains or within an atrium space that's a two-story space, as long as there's other circulation through it. So there are ways to do that, but we need at least 2 stairs. And we need another stairs for other circulation on the court side for prisoners and judges in case that elevator's not working. So 3 stairs is really what we're talking about for any 2-story concept. And at least 1 elevator, and for safety's sake and security, we're suggesting 2 is a better way to go. And it sounds like that's debatable. This is really what it would look like, so you get a feeling of, that's the existing courthouse right there. This is what you'd see of the addition. There's no windows down here because they're vaults and all that kind of stuff behind the departments. And then these are judges and court reporters, so there are windows up there. And this is the jail. This tall piece in the jail is the day room. So from the north, that's what you'd see. It's pretty big, not as tall as that, obviously. And then from the south, the thought was, okay, it's an open corridor. Let's make it so it's obviously different than the courthouse. This piece is very similar to that because in plan, remember, it basically just extended the courthouse, about doubled it in length. And that's what this piece is. That's existing. This is the stairwell in the corner, and that's the jail. So on the first floor, these are all the departments. The second floor, that's the public corridor.
Is that a glass wall? No,
Yeah.
it is, okay.
Yep. In this concept, it's a glass wall. Yep. And again, to go over all that, these concepts were developed very quickly by a team of 5 architects, and we had 2 full days to start from. We want it to be attached, or we want it to be freestanding, or we want it to be a new building to get to that. So we very quickly developed these concepts. They're very conceptual. So the next step is, okay, based on the program that we have, which again is 33,000 square feet to 35,000 square feet, depending on storage, and that's where it's at today. We're expecting that we're going to find some efficiencies in our next meeting and reduce that. But based on that, to have an apples-to-apples comparison between these options, we need to price them out.
Can I just ask one question? One of the things the supervisor said they were going to do is get an estimate for rehabilitating just the current courthouse, including those 70s additions. Is that, in the 2 things that included rehabilitation, was kind of the core of the historic courthouse. Did you ever really analyze those 70s additions in terms of their ability to be rehabilitated or cost, or, because one thing they said they were going to do is look at that, and then using other county spaces like, the jail is sort of, well, they did talk about closing it at one time, but now it's overbuilt, maybe using some of the spaces in the jail for something. I mean, is that something you ever explored so that the actual, what you have to build isn't quite so much?
As a matter of fact, it kind of went the other way. We were asked to evaluate even some other spaces for efficiency, to price out what might it be to include some other spaces into this program. We were asked to look at a couple other buildings, but mostly it was, how can we get out of those spaces and make things more efficient? For example, if we could combine them, there might be efficiencies. We don't need extra restrooms. We don't need additional conference rooms, things like that. So the thought was if we could combine more into one, we would have less total square footage. And reduce the operating costs and maintenance costs, utility costs, and stuff.
We spent quite a bit of time trying to get the courts portion into that building and providing the separation of circulation, and it was not possible.
Well, one of the things they talked about was just building a separate courtroom and rehabilitating the courthouse. I mean, I don't know.
No.
Is that something they ever ask you to do?
We tried to develop that as part of the concept, but it doesn't fit. Based on the current program numbers we have, it does not fit.
But perhaps on another site. I
That-
mean, we we've been told all along. that
No, I'm
we-
talking about fitting inside the existing building. If you took everything but the courts, tried to fit it inside the existing building, with the current numbers we have, it doesn't physically fit.
Right, I understand what you're
Kevin.
saying.
Okay.
Yeah.
At our very first workshop, where we kind of identified which directions we'd be going, one of those options, I believe, was trying to use that building, put addition on it, and then put the courts some other place, and that was not approved, that was not selected. Am I right?
Well, looking at other buildings in the community, we didn't identify any specific.
Yeah, it was not, I don't think it was not.
These are the three that
Yeah.
we were told to study by the advisory committee. Okay, so the costing exercise is an exercise. We always go through this, we remind people, these are numbers to use for cost comparison. Everybody's gonna be shocked by how big these numbers are. Cost means is a construction industry cost estimating software and resource. They track every building in the United States, basically, every non-private building, even housing, as a matter of fact. And so we've got a summary of courthouses in the Midwest that were constructed in 2011, 2012. They ranged overall in cost from $145 a square foot to about $275 a square foot. $140 a square foot are the one-story, let's do it as simply as we can, and the 275 are obviously, yeah, we got marble floors and marble columns and all that kind of stuff. So we evaluated this, and there's a lot of data. I just put one of the pages in here, but it kind of breaks down the construction into different components. The first one starts with foundations, substructure, and then superstructure, and then the shell. It looks at doors and windows, it looks at finishes, plumbing, mechanical, electrical, elevators, all those different pieces. So what we did, this is kind of the baseline of what they're suggesting at $200 a square foot. Can't read it, but that's like $208 a square foot. And of course, we know that we're not gonna be able to spend $208 a square foot on this courthouse, so we decided that a number that we should start with in today's cost is $165 a square foot for the courthouse. That's a decision we made to say, okay, between 145 and 275, we're going with 165 for today's cost. It's not the cheapest, but it's tending toward being efficient in cost. So as we look at a new building, these are the numbers that we can pretty quickly use. There's also information for historic renovations, and adaptive reuse, and all those different kind of renovation projects, updating. As we looked at the historic renovation piece, what we know is we really need to take the building down to any historic components, but really to the foundation, the superstructure, the shell, which includes the brick exterior walls, windows and doors, and of course the roof. So we looked at the components of that made sense. Those components that would remain in the courthouse before a major renovation account for about 32%, 28 to 32% of the total cost. So using those calculations, we developed some of our costing information. So this is option A. This is a summary sheet from a more detailed sheet. You can't read it, so we pulled the numbers out a little bit higher. I told you there were three categories. Building construction. Like if you were just going to say, we're just going to build a building, on bid day, that's the number that a contractor would give you. The site work construction, and then the soft costs. In this case, this is 5A. The site construction costs are primarily related to paving and parking and prepping for the addition. This option goes a long way toward the south property line, so we're not going to be able to keep the existing parking lot, for example. One of the numbers that's low here is the soft cost number. The soft cost number is this bottom category. It's made up of a lot of things. You probably can't see it very well, but there's two little red numbers down there in the bottom. One of those little red numbers is historic preservation tax credit or grant. And from our experience, that's 25%, potential 25% of the cost of the rehabilitation piece, which the cost of the rehabilitation piece is right here. We've got a breakdown of costs of repairing the foundations, tuck pointing the exterior walls, repair of windows, repair of the cupola, roof structure repair, and some ADA modifications that need to happen in the basic structure of the building, as well as the 68% of the $165 a square foot, $112 is the renovation, once you get all that structural work completed.
So what was the cost on that particular part of it?
Well, 25% of it is about $670,000. So one of the red number down here, that's a credit of $675,000 against the total. That's what we would expect to see. So you take that number times 4, that'd give you that number. And I can give you an exact one. So you total those three pieces up, and that's 8.8. And again, these are for comparison, and we do need to go back and look at square footages. Whoops. Then really the refinement of this one is 6A. Again, it's very similar, except that it's more compact. It allows us to utilize part of that parking that's down there on the south side of the site, the first bay of it, with some modification.
That was without that little space between, Kevin?
Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah.
We tried to create something similar on the sides because we're getting so close to the wings of that more historic piece of the building.
But both of these are to the south. They're
Both of
just
these are to the south.
south.
Yep.
They're not the one in between.
Correct.
No.
Okay.
One in between is F. These are both A's. A's. So this is, working with the historic preservation architect, this is the concept that is most delicately adding on to and expanding the existing courthouse. The new,
Is that number there inclusive of tunneling?
I'm sure it's not.
yeah, it does have the tunnel in it.
Oh,
So
this
if
one
you
does?
took the
So we
tunnel
took
out,
the
what
tunnel
would you
out.
be taking out, $150,000 or more?
More than that.
More than that.
Yeah, because the other thing to keep in mind about the tunnel is, that means we have to add an elevator into the jail.
Yeah,
The
right.
elevator and stair in the jail, that's $150,000 right there. So you take the tunnel out, it's more like $250,000
So
deduction.
the 6A that you had on there previously, that 649, is reduced by more than 150 because you're not going to talk about the tunnel, right?
If indeed that's correct. When we
Okay.
go through the refinement of the program and that comes out and other things will come out, those numbers will definitely go down.
Right.
Usually what happens in a process like this is, just like anything else, tell us what you want, okay, here's the design, here's what the cost is to do what you want. Now tell us what you really want. And that's where we're at. But these are really good for comparisons because they're apples to apples.
Is there demolition in that 10C? Because
There is demolition in 10C. There's
where is
demolition in each of them, but 10C does have the deconstruction of the entire building. And not only does it have the deconstruction, but it has a documentation of the building. We felt it was important, if the courthouse comes down, to do a thorough documentation of the building, and we included that cost in here as
so
well.
that's already all in there?
That is in here, and this does not, of course, include any kind of credit for historic preservation tax credits.
Right.
It does, as well as the others do, include a small credit for an energy efficiency rebate on the building. They're in the range of $35,000 on each of the options.
So what is the cost of the demolition of the courthouse, and what would that amount be?
I'm not gonna be able to read this, but I can give you, I can look at that because I've loaded those onto the hard drive on my computer, and after we go through the presentation, I can answer some questions on some of the detail.
In an earlier meeting today, you said you thought the historic preservation credit money was doubtful.
What Jack Porter is the architect, he's the state preservation architect at the state, at SHPO. What he told me this afternoon when I was confirming with him the number that we should identify as a credit, he said, currently, today, like anything else, it's like a law. It's there. But anybody who's been following all of the budget cuts knows that there is a category of money that has to be cut, and unfortunately, cultural affairs, which is what that is probably at the most risk. I don't know that it's going to go away, but Jack is concerned that it's very much at risk. That's what I was reporting.
So we can't count on it.
You can't count on it. No, you can't count on it. But he believes that there's better than a 50% chance that it'll still be available for a project that's probably on the timeline of the next couple of years like this. But he says we can't count on it. But then I asked him more about it, and he said, we never could. Because from one year to the next, it could always go away. But it's been there for a long time, and in the state of Iowa, at least, historic preservation tax credits have gone up and up. So this is option F. This is the one that's in between. You asked me, is it the one in? This is the one that's in between the two. And again, it has the benefit of the preservation tax credit because we're proposing rehabbing the existing courthouse in this strategy. And it's got some very similar numbers on the rehab. The cost of this one is up a little bit higher because we're building next to the jail and the courthouse, and when you're building next to buildings, you have underpinning of foundations. And there's a little bit of money in there for that. It's maybe different from the others. The parking lot goes away, and a lot of parking had to be added here, so that's, again, drives that site cost number up. So those are the numbers. I've got a kind of a comparison. Boy, you can't even see that, can you?
But if you took the tunnel off of A, it would be nearly equivalent to the last one you had up. Is that correct?
Yeah, what we heard in our last meeting, it would be about fourth person if I said to third person. That there's a possibility that the tunnel or even an above ground link would go away on any of the options.
Right.
Yeah. So the prices range anywhere from about 8.7 to about 7.5. So they're within $1.2 million of each other. And as we continue to go through the process and refine the program and refine a real design, the numbers will probably change, but the relationship of the numbers to each other won't change too significantly. I mean, they're not going to flip-flop.
Kevin, just for clarity, on the one with the tax credit, that tax credit was included to reduce the cost.
The tax credit's included in 5A, 6A, and 2F, and it reduces the cost by about $670,000 of those options. And it's already built into these numbers.
So if you don't get it, you have to add that number back to those numbers.
Yes.
But it's not guaranteed that it's counted on your figures, right?
It's listed as a soft cost.
It's listed as, it's in the figures, 670. And these are budgeting numbers. We tried to identify everything we can. So that's a summary of those numbers. And then we were asked to develop kind of a life cycle cost analysis. Hopefully you can see these a little bit better. These are options 5A, 6A, 10A, and 2F again. This top part is really construction cost. And these are those three categories: building construction, site work, and soft costs for each of the strategies. So this is the total, we call them capital funds for the project. And these are the square footages based on our designs. And again, these are designs that we developed on tracing paper at a 1 to 16th inch scale. A 1 to, it wasn't quite 16th, was it? A little less than that, I think, 1 to 20. It was 1 to 20, wasn't it? It was 1 to 16.
The site
Anyway,
was 1 to 32nd.
that was very preliminary, but these are the square footages that we've come up with. And then these are comparisons of operating costs based on, again, some national standards for new buildings, for maintenance, We typically budget between $1 and $1.50 for a new building for maintenance, an average over a 10-year, 20-year, 30-year, 4-year period.
Does everybody understand what a life cycle cost number means? Do you want some more explanation on that?
Sure.
We were told this is a 100-year building, 50-year building, so we're asked to look at, okay, what is the cost of the building over 50 years for maintenance, utilities, and construction all combined, so that we can evaluate these appropriately. And a lot of that has to do with the exact materials you pick, so sometimes it's a little tricky to do at this level. So we've used some national standard numbers. We've looked at what the utility costs are in the community. We've got water, we've got energy, we've got maintenance costs, and we've allocated dollars for those. What the National Trust recommends for ongoing maintenance cost is closer to $3. We used $2.60 a square foot. We didn't use $3 for historically rehabilitated buildings. It's actually down here, $2.50. The energy costs that we would expect to see, we think there can be significant improvement over what you're paying now. So we've got it down at $2.60 a square foot per year for the existing structure and $1.60 per year for the new structure. So if you look at this, you say, okay, option A's got 27,000 square foot of new times the energy cost and the water and the maintenance, and then 10,000 square feet of historic, multiply that times those square footages, and that gives you kind of an annual operations budget for what you should budget on average. We wouldn't expect you need to have a lot of maintenance cost the first few years of a building, but it averages out over 50 years, and then this is a 3% inflation over a 50-year number. So this is your capital and operating costs combined over 50 years. And what we found is they're very similar. The rehabilitation ones range between 24.3 million up to almost 25 million versus 20. So that's a 50-year life cycle cost evaluation.
How does that compare to what the old courthouse operated at over the last 50 years?
This is much less.
This is much less?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. On the utility side. So this is the schedule that we went through. Many of you are very familiar with this. The workshop was February 28th and March 1st. We had those presentations. We had 2 advisory meetings ahead of that. Tonight is the March 14th. It's our intent to have these coordination meeting basically with the planning committee to go through the user groups in the building, define that program. And once we do that, we'll revise all these numbers. And we'll be making kind of public presentations in 3 of the outlying communities, probably over the next 6 to 8 weeks on this data. And then from that are some next steps. It says topical studies or reports and design development. Topical studies or reports would be if the decision is made that we absolutely want to maintain the existing building, then we would work with the State Historic Preservation Office and do a historic assessment of the building. There's a grant available for that Jack was telling me about, of course. And there's also studies. We would study the mortar on the building because when you do a rehab, it's a line-based mortar, and you have to find what the percentages are. A lot of those types of studies would happen next, if that is the case. Geotechnical investigation, where the expansion piece would go, and just further design would be the next steps if that decision is made. So that's kind of the process. The last piece is to rank these 4 options, or if you want to throw 5A out and say 6A is the one we should focus on, 3 options. If you want to vote on that, we have brought some ballots to let people pick the ones they like or have a preference over. You can pull the plans back up if you want to look closer at them. I'm sorry that we don't have a better room where we could tape all these up on the wall. Many of you have seen these plans and were involved in helping us refine them, at least the advisory committee members. some. We can put those back up and we can allow people to vote. We've got ballots specifically for advisory committee members, and if they're public members of the public who want to, express their opinion too, we can do that. So, if people feel like they have enough information to give direction, or do you want to wait until we move to a later phase in this?
What kind of input will people really be allowed to have as you move around and, you're planning on some meeting sites in Riceville, Statesville, and St. Answer, is that correct?
Those meeting sites will be more informational. People can give input, and obviously this is a long way from being a completed design of any kind. But those meetings will primarily be opportunities for people to see how the process has been going, what happened at this meeting, what the refinements have been, follow-up meetings with the planning committee and the departments, and what the outcome of the opinion is of the folks who attended today.
Now, obviously, the meeting you had at 4:30, I believe, was the first meeting of the planning committee, is that correct?
It was the first formal meeting of the planning committee.
Okay.
That's correct.
Would you care to share any of their?
Yeah, I've got some notes from the planning committee. And of course, there's multiple individuals, so you always get different comments.
Like,
Oh, thank you. Glad to be late.
We can still back up. Let's see. The county attorney expressed that he felt that the current sheriff had told him that he doesn't support or feel that the county will support the addition of a connector or an elevator or a holding cell. But the retired judge kind of opposed that and said that he felt that that was critical. And if you remember, our first goal was to provide a facility that creates a safe and secure operation. So there was a back and forth conversation related to the connector.
The connector.
Now, we never really intended to have a holding cell, but we had a temporary holding space for defendants outside of the courtroom. It's just really semantics of how you design that space. How secure a space is it? If it becomes a holding cell, then there's oversight by other organizations that causes potential complications. There was also note that St. Ansgar has a potential elementary school remodeling or build new referendum coming up, and that might affect this. Another county board member has acknowledged that. I wrote down that we will be sitting down with the planning committee in the near future to go through the program, which I've already talked about, with the department heads, and sitting down with a floor plan with them. Each of them came and observed the design workshop. We emailed them most all of this information this morning, so they were able to review it prior to the meeting. We talked about existing basement. You saw that we had listed several things as alternate options that would be really convenient to have, voting machines and other storage put into the courthouse, so we didn't have to either rent space or have space that wasn't adequate or waterproof or whatever it might be. And then there was a strong suggestion that the crawl space under the existing courthouse be excavated out to make that a full basement, because it's a little bit less than 800 square feet right now. It's a tiny little space, and it's just dirt down there. If anybody's ever had a crawl space in their house or another building, they know what that's like. And we did build in some costs to update the existing 800 square foot basement under there. But we did not build in any cost to totally excavate and create a basement.
Was that by a supervisor or by one of the other two?
That was by multiple supervisors.
They're concerned about the dirt floors causing mold, and it's.
You said the M word. There's a concern. That's what I wrote down.
And were the supervisors pretty much on the same wavelength?
Related to,
Well, Any one of the plans?
They had, while they have had access to them, they haven't reviewed the plans with us in detail. We did not have time to do that today, so we'll be doing that at a future meeting now.
Will the next planning committee, will that be open to the public?
If the three supervisors are there, I'm sure it will be.
Okay.
I will put the video up on YouTube if you missed it.
They also wanted to be in the basement.
One of the supervisors stressed that he wanted to be in the basement, and I did have to clarify if he meant fully subterranean or
6 feet.
partially. And another supervisor had told me before the meeting he really didn't care where he was at. And I think two of the supervisors said, one said basement's fine, one said I definitely want to be in the basement, and the other one said wherever.
Looks like they're going to the basement.
And as we expressed, you know, the opportunities for creating a storm shelter under the new building, early on, through emails with some of the planning committee members, they said, boy, that might be something we should look into as well. Sometimes there's grant money for that, not always. But they thought it just might be a good thing, considering safety, and safety is one of our goals. As we've looked at this, we did not put a full basement under any of these concepts. It's just we're added square footage to the project, and we're trying to keep the cost down as low as possible.
If people look at the YouTube, they'll see there's a discussion, as you will recall, of the cost of the courthouse and the county attorney's comments on what kinds of bond issues he would support and what kinds of costs he would not support. And I think you'll find it very interesting to read that.
And they saw these numbers, and their immediate reaction was, no way. These are just way too high. Absolutely not. So we said, okay. We showed you what was requested. Now our next meeting will be, how do we find efficiencies and make this so it is affordable? And we've asked them to identify what a potential budget might be. And I think there are differences of opinion of what the potential budget should be. I know there are.
So the
I think there's a question about current space that is either owned or operated by the county and whether everything needs to be at one location or not. And so, you know, if you're trying to contract space, there are very real questions about what exactly has to be in the courthouse. And I don't know that you are wrestling with that. Maybe the advisory group or this planning committee is. But it strikes me that there is a lot of space right now near or adjacent that may be underutilized. And so the desire for all the space in one building, when that came up earlier, when Judy was asking about that, that's not really been your charge. But it strikes me that we're missing something that could reduce the cost significantly if we would simply allocate existing, I'm not talking about new space now, existing space to make what amounts to as much of the current courthouse into the future courthouse.
I think that would be a very obvious next step for our evaluation.
And so could we put an option on the table today that we could express that as a favored response?
Wasn't that one of the options we had to start with? And
That was voted down.
The committee voted it down. I mean, there was nobody wanted various offices throughout the community.
But now, knowing the size of the building and the costs, I think that you're gonna have to set priorities.
Well, some things like the voting machines or economic development. You know, if the courthouse offices move out of the plaza, maybe the food bank could go back to the plaza, and some of that space could be reallocated for storage, for home health care, for voting machines. For some of that stuff does not have to be in the courthouse. But that'd be very close to the courthouse, though. I mean, or the jail. You know, part of the jail could be renovated for some of the storage of some of the things they were talking about.
And I think part of the intent too is how do we get out of some of the spaces that we're in so we can consolidate and reduce our operating costs.
So could we
Well,
have
that,
a fourth
yes.
option we could vote on today then?
that we would rehab the existing courthouse and utilize some adjacent county spaces. Would that be?
No, we haven't been asked to develop that, and we haven't even looked at what the options would be. I don't think that'd be reasonable to vote on that. If you're saying we don't think it's appropriate for our advisory committee to express any kind of a vote until that might be studied, that's fine.
Well, I should probably explain how a lot of members of the public feel that prior to the bond issue, we were told if the bond issue did not pass, there would be two options, and we have quotes from the supervisors about this. One would be to rehabilitate the existing courthouse, and the other would be to build new. So many of us are quite upset that we've never had this option.
So we can do that now, or we can do it at another meeting.
Well, as you know, I did,
Yes.
and I want the public to know, I did give them the scope of work for the historical preservation grant that was not done, and they were gonna answer those questions.
But that two of the options.
That came out of a previous meeting.
No, but they were not talking about including all of these spaces.
We had asked the advisory committee to tell us every option you can think of. And every option was identified, and that specific thing to say, don't add anything onto the courthouse, was never identified as an option to even be discussed.
I guess.
I wish that it had been.
Yeah, I guess, at both on November 6th, that was election day, and November 20th, two of the supervisors on November 6th, I believe, or on election day, said if the vote didn't pass, they would get the cost of completely renovating the current building and using some other space and a new building so that they could do comparisons. The same thing was said again at the November 20th meeting. Joel said they would do them, ask you to do them simultaneously, so they could, compare the costs. That came off.
And I was
that came
aware,
off
advisory
YouTube.
committee.
and I was very much aware of that, and the advisory committee never asked us to do it. The supervisors basically said, we're gonna turn this process over to the advisory committee of 43 people. And the advisory committee was supposed to identify every option they wanted us to study, and then vote on them, and we did. We offered to study even one more. That option wasn't even identified, let alone prioritized.
No, I guess that's what Judy was saying. I mean, we all thought that was going to be done anyway, just so they could compare the costs, because that's what they'd said.
We have
And Joel
developed,
told me that he'd ask you to do that. So
What was that addressed this evening, though? That
We
was
have
addressed at
developed-
4:30 tonight,
and I
right?
said, we have not yet done that.
Right.
But we have developed enough cost through our details of these four options, that we could very easily piece together what that would be.
Okay.
But then we need the supplemental information to say, where do all these other spaces go that just physically don't fit?
Right, we
And then we also need to define, okay, now that you know what the costs are, where are we gonna cut the square footage? Before we can do a real evaluation.
Excuse me, sir, were you gonna circulate ballot this evening?
I was gonna ask
Some
by
of
a
us
show
have
of
to
hands
go to a high
of it.
school concert, so we
Yep.
have to leave.
Yeah.
Advisory committee members that are here, please raise your hand. Okay, of that group of advisory committee members, do you want to vote tonight or do you want to wait? Raise your hand, leave your hand up if you want to vote tonight. Fanny, you gotta
I
decide.
think I'd rather wait. But
Okay,
Yeah, I
one,
think-
I'd rather
two,
wait.
3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. Okay, and the ones who want to wait, 13.
And what are we waiting for? To
Yeah.
get
Until
another
we
cost?
study the,
Advisory
To get
committee.
another cost from it?
we will probably be refining the program and the costs.
For all the plans, right?
Well, I'd rather.
Well,
Yeah.
that's the next
We
phase.
would
That's
have
fine.
to, because we need an apples to apples comparison.
Right, right.
I think it's only smart to wait.
Yeah.
No, why
To-
would you
to-
want to vote now?
But we
Because
can't
he's
do
gonna
that.
come back with something different.
Right.
Well, it'll be after they've reduced some of the space, the supervisors are very interested in reducing some of the spaces, so that would change.
Does everybody understand what we just voted on? Okay, we only got half the vote.
Okay.
Yeah.
Advisory committees members who don't want to vote tonight.
What?
You
Oh,
don't want to vote on that.
yes.
We had 13 who did. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 8 to 13. I mean, we can vote tonight and get people's opinions, but we are still gonna be working forward on this other option. But it's data that we'd like to have, so.
Okay.
So you hand out these yellow tabs. There, a piece of paper have a yellow highlighter marked through it. Those are for the advisory committee members. Advisory folks, raise your hand so Don can get them to you. Don, you want to get this on?
I think the lady that mentioned wanting to vote was not advisory.
Advisory committee here?
She left.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, here, let me hand some back.
Yeah, vote on some.
Give me some, give me back some, I'll get them back there, you get up there.
You want to write that on there? Oh my God.
I'd like to see the form one more time.
Flash the photo.
It's not that much more. Looks awful.
Does everybody have one?
So everybody on the advisory committee have,
I guess I don't need to start at the beginning. I can start at the back.
Oh, we need one more.
Nobody else gets it.
we have the other ballots without the yellow stripe.
Okay, this is 5A. Remember, 5A is the one that has the glass separator. We would have to get a variance from the city to do that.
What is the variance are you talking about?
There's a required setback.
From the street?
This
25 foot.
Okay,
That's the setback.
okay.
So the building extends over that. You
I'm
can
gonna
get a
decide
better
that.
body.
Yeah, you know, maybe I'm changing to one of those 6A. I think I might go to 6A because
Here's 6A.
You want to take the picture? I'm going to take some pictures.
6A does fit on the site.
Is the public going to vote?
yes, yes.
As
We
soon as
don't
this
have those ballots.
We're gonna hand ours in. The public's gonna get theirs.
I'll make sure.
Go ahead and pass them out. Please only vote once.
The question I have is, one of the supervisors decided to go with the one story. Because it would look down so much.
We'll see.
I like to ask them.
We'll have to
So whatever decision you make tonight may not be the one story. Right?
So that we're all in the same space.
This isn't mine,
So that we're all in the same one. We're actually voting.
Yeah, I did. I voted for, first I did for 5A, then I went with 6A, because I'm
6A.
thinking of that thing right up to the sidewalk.
I know.
Yeah, I like that. So I went with 6A then.
Did everybody get a ballot?
I'm gonna put really none of the above.
It's true. Well, he said they were gonna explore that other option then.
Yeah, they
They said they were gonna explore
Well,
that.
I mean, you know, when Judy broke on her, she said,
But Joel, he had said at the meeting tonight.
Joel, yeah, and
He asked
Joel
him again
said that,
tonight.
and here she is saying, well,
But he answered it tonight though. When he said,
They asked him to do it.
right, and make sure that I put that in the paper, that he asked them now to do that stuff. Yeah, if I remember.
so it is going to happen.
Yeah, it's going, they met with Jack Porter this afternoon, and so that process is taking place now.
Sir,
14 for renovation.
which ones are the ones
You know, if you put all the.
that
These
didn't?
two are very similar.
No, the none ones. They just want to know right away. There was
There was one here,
okay
and there was 4.
that didn't have any decision at all, or was non-legible. Okay,
None of the
that's-
above.
They said,
None of the above.
they basically said none of the above.
okay.
So they voted for a different option.
Still 27 to 17.
9 to 15, 8 to 11.
I'm just trying to say.
Well, no, it's
Oh, and then you take the 6 in that other one. So you could take the case 17 and 6, 20,
I say 14 to 11, yeah.
That was keeping the old courthouse, and so was 6A and 5A, so if you add all those up, that's 14. Of the public, 14 voted for more than the nation, and 11 voted for him. So of the public that was here, majority of the board.
Yeah, we just wanted to thank everybody on the advisory committee. Going to a lot of meetings. Everybody from the public too.
There you go. Get a vote.
Thank you.